This is the Bordello and Pool Hall from Thomas Yorke Enterprises, and it is currently distributed by Dr. Ben's company. In 2009, Dr. Ben purchased all the mold and product masters for Thomas Yorke Enterprises and renamed the series Scale Model Masterpieces. So this is released under the series name Scale Model Masterpieces from Dr. Ben's company. I'm not sure what year this was originally released or how many were made. I kind of get the feeling that Dr. Ben's does these as kind of a production on demand, but I'm not entirely sure. The instructions were clearly printed from Dr. Ben's, and he recommends the use of a lot of Dr. Ben's products during the build. As you can see, everything is packaged up really nice. Each individual plaster casting is kind of wrapped in its own wrapper there. So nothing was broken when I got it. This is mostly a really high quality kit with no build problems, but there was one wall that didn't quite fit, and I'll talk about that later in the video. I did decide to buy some Dr. Ben stains. I've never used them before, so I'm going to try them out in this video. At the time of making this video, it looks like Dr. Ben's has put the entire company of Scale Model Masterpieces up for sale, so you could buy it if you want to. These are really good quality castings, as I said. A couple of the pieces might have some mold lines that need to be filed off, but you can see as I look through these pieces, there's not really a lot of problems with most of the pieces. For the most part, the windows are molded solid. If you want to do anything like light up the interior of the building, you'll have to carve out the holes where the windows would go. And I'm not sure how much that would compromise the structure of the building. The first part of the assembly is to glue these three facade pieces together, and he recommends that you use white glue to glue these plaster castings together. In the past, I've used 5-minute epoxy or super glue or sometimes Gorilla Glue, and I haven't been really happy with those. I was actually pretty happy with the use of white glue here, so I think I'll probably use that in the future on plaster castings. So you want to do this on parchment paper so that you don't glue your plaster castings to your work table. This is the assembly of the rear of the building, so you want to line everything up on a straight edge to make sure that the walls sit flush on the base. Now it's time to start adding the walls to the base, and again I do this with white glue. I did add some wood blocks in the corners for reinforcement. You always want to be careful that your reinforcement is not going to interfere with any further assembly of the building. While the base dries, let's take a look at the windows and the accessory pieces. One of the first things I want to do is cut the windows off of their sprues so that I can paint them. The kit includes a resin cast roof air conditioner, but I did not use it. The front doorway and windows of the Bordello is made of plastic doors and windows, and there's wood trim pieces that connect them. You have to be careful when putting together this assembly to make sure that it's the exact width to fit within the plaster pieces. Now I add the wall section that separates the pool hall and the Bordello. So we're at the point of figuring out which parts don't fit. So when we look at the back of the building, everything looks correct. We have this wall, the centerpiece, and it all fits along the length of the base. If we look at the front of the building, this side looks correct. And if you put in the upper part, this wall goes halfway over this stone wall, which is what happens in the pictures. But then we have this wall, which goes here, and we're missing about 3/8 of an inch. And then there's this wall, which goes on top of it, which needs to start there and go over to about there, so it's missing almost 1/2 inch. So here's the picture. You can see that this wall piece goes all the way over to the end, or most of the way over to the end, and then halfway over this pillar. And that this wall piece goes from the pillar over to the side wall. So that's where we're missing. And then this is missing, well, about the same distance, about 3/8 of an inch. There's also a vertical gap in there. A little hard to see, but there is one. My solution to the undersized wall is to glue wood strips on each side. That will allow me to sand down or scrape down the wood strips to give a tight fit between the two wall sections. I think it'll look pretty reasonable. I also needed to add a strip of wood to the top of the wall section to bring it up to the correct height. Because of all the sanding, I want to vacuum any of the remaining dust off the building before I paint it. In the past, working on plaster structures, I've had little blobs on the surface, which I believe is plaster dust that got collected by the paint. I didn't get those blobs on this build. I don't know whether it's because I vacuumed or whether because it's better quality plaster. Looking at the building pictures in the instructions and on the box art, there's wood strips on the back of the walls of the facade. I think he just carved those strips into the plaster, but I didn't think that was going to look right, so I decided to actually add wood strips to the back walls of the facade, so that's what I'm doing here. Painting the stonework started with Vallejo US Khaki, which came from a spray can, and I believe it is an enamel. And now I'm applying a wash of Vallejo dark brown. Now I'm applying Folk Art iced coffee with the sponge. I think the trick to painting stonework and even concrete is building up many layers of color. I do this using washes, a sponge, and dry brushing. Now I do a fairly heavy dry brush of Americana burlap. For the wood walls, I start by painting Folk Art barnwood. Because this is a cheap craft paint, the coverage isn't great, but it doesn't matter at this point because it will all get covered up later. The next step on the wood walls is a wash of Vallejo dark gray, which is practically black. Next on the wood, I do a dry brush of Vallejo silver gray. Now I'm applying what would be the main paint color, and that is white, and I'm using a sponge for that. I'm going to use a trim color, so I want to mask off the areas where I'm going to apply the trim. Now I mask off the white areas to apply the blue trim color. I generally use a sponge to apply the trim color. However, the trim areas have a lot of surface relief, and the sponge only hits the high areas. I have to use a paintbrush to get the paint into the cracks. Some of the doors are just cast right into the walls, so I'm painting those now. The railings are painted blue, and then I'm going to use some brown applied with a sponge to give it a chipped paint look. The kit includes some nicely printed transparent plastic for the front windows. I'm applying the windows to the doors using superglue, but I would find out later that I used the wrong doors in the kit. So I'd have to rip these out and do it over again. For some reason, the kit includes two different styles of front door. When you build plaster kits, you really want to make sure your windows fit into the wall spaces before you do any painting. I really thought that I did that, but apparently I didn't. So here I am scraping away the sides of the window areas so that the windows fit. Since the windows are blocked out, I put curtains in where the windows are going to go. The curtains are just pictures of curtains that I found on the internet. I pasted the images into a Word doc and resized them to the correct size and printed them out. Now we get to the roof. It's a little hard to see, but the roof card is actually pre-cut about halfway through the card. So you just have to finish cutting along the cut area, and I'm using a razor blade for that. You just want to make sure that you do not cut the relief lines for the folds. I glue the roof seam together using super glue gel, and then there are a couple of brace pieces that go inside underneath the roof. I will also attach them with super glue gel. He gives you wood strips for the battens. I don't think he gives you enough, however. I ran out and I had to use some from a different kit. It's always just so annoying when these kits don't provide enough scale lumber. Since this kit is manufactured and distributed by Dr. Benz, it's no surprise that he recommends Dr. Benz products for painting and weathering. I really didn't know how I wanted to paint the roof, so he recommended this Dr. Benz stain for painting the roof. I have never used Dr. Benz products before, so I thought I would give it a try, so I shelled out the $50 to buy a set of 8 stains. They seem to be pigments in a base of isopropyl alcohol. So they dry fast and they clean up with water. I actually ended up using 2 coats of the green, and then he said to use a coat of white over top of that. After the stains dried, I coated the roof with weathering powders and then sprayed with an acrylic sealer. And that's pretty much it for how I painted the roof. Overall, I would say I was pretty happy with the Dr. Benz weathering stain, and I'll probably use it on other projects. Assembling the porch is pretty easy. You just have to cut the railing to the correct length. They give you just enough railing to complete the porch. So now it's time to do some work on the sign. This is the sign piece, so I have to cut this out of the cardboard. The sign text is just printed on paper. I sprayed it with some spray adhesive and now I'm just attaching it to the sign boards. I weathered the sign using weathering powders. This is the roof for the pool hall. He gives you a sheet that has a peel-off backing, and the sheet has the tar paper lines marked on it. So you're supposed to place this over the cardboard and then use some Dr. Ben stain to color the sheet. I added some pieces of wood to support the roof. The printed piece of tar paper is supposed to be slightly larger than the roof area so that the tar paper rolls up the sides like it would in real life. During this fitting process, I found out that the roof bowed down a little bit, so I had to add wood strips underneath it to keep it flat. The instructions recommend coloring the roof with the black Dr. Ben's weathering stain. Now I'm adding the Dr. Ben's weathering stain, and honestly, it really is not looking too good. The roof paper has a slick coating over it, so the stain just pools up on top of the roof paper. It doesn't absorb in. So I tried to fix that by covering the roof with some AK Interactive asphalt, but because the roof paper is so slick, the asphalt just slides around. There's nothing for it to grip to. So in the end, I just ripped the whole thing out. I put in a new roof just made out of cardstock, and I covered it with AK Interactive's asphalt. Now it's time to add the porch and the columns. The columns are too long. You'll have to cut them to length. I should have checked to make sure that right column is straight. It ended up being a little crooked. Now I'm test fitting the second story and the porch roof. So in the process of this, I found out that the porch roof support posts were too long. So I have to nip them off by about 1/8 of an inch. The awning for the pool hall is supposed to be supported by guide wires, but I know from experience it's pretty difficult to install guide wires, so I built some wooden supports and I'm attaching those now. The problem with guide wires is trying to get all the holes evenly spaced. This is much easier. This is the stairway that they give you with the kit, and it goes in there, something like that. I didn't think it looked all that good, so I decided to just build a little balcony, which I'm just going to attach right in there, and that'll be it. With the assembly complete, I decided to go around some of the brickwork with this Dr. Ben's yellow stain.